The French military leaves Senegal. They've been there since the 1700s. As they leave the country to Bassirou Diomaye Faye, the IMF suddenly says that the country owes 7 billion US dollars. Where did the $7 billion go? Welcome to another edition of the Intelligence Report. My name is Dr. Joseph Opare. You are welcome. And we want to look at some things that have been going on in the country Senegal. And we want to tie this to some things that have been going on in other countries around the world, so we get a better understanding of politics and international affairs from a completely different perspective that you probably have not heard. Let's get into what's going on with Senegal so that we can really crunch our teeth on some of the facts. First of all, we've got to understand, as I said, the French military just left Senegal. They've been there since the 1700s. And what we have to understand is when these militaries enter into countries, a lot of the time we believe that they're there to protect the country. No, they're not there to protect that country. They're there to protect the interests of the country they come from. And so the French military, being from France, being in Senegal, is protecting the interests of France. And now they seem to have left the country. So that's point number one. The second fact is the fact that Bassirou Diomaye Faye takes over and is installed after the elections in 2024. However, when he comes in to office, suddenly there's a discovery by the IMF of underreporting or cooked books, let me say, by the former Senegalese government under Macky Sall. And so there's some kind of corruption that is going on to the tune of $7 billion. Where does this money go to? Well, according to my research, the following happened. And I'm trying to make this simple and not complicated because sometimes when we listen to this stuff, it just gets all complicated with a whole lot of jargon. So I'm going to break it down. So CFA, the CFA franc, is a type of franc that was spent not only in Africa, but also in the Caribbean. And I believe it's still in use now. And so this CFA franc has been used all around Africa in all the colonies of France and also in the Caribbean. Let's look at how much of this CFA franc has been spent according to the reports. So what we're told is there's been misappropriation of funds to the tune of 7 billion US dollars. So 6.4 billion CFA was used to rent the UN house in Diamniadio, and this was judged as excessive spending. 4 billion CFA transferred to Air Senegal without a clear purpose. 1.2 billion CFA spent acquiring DP shares lacking justification or flagged as questionable in the audit report. Okay, so other than this, we are told that there were off-budget borrowing and transfers to the tune of 125 billion CFA francs in unmonitored disbursements in 2023. So what does this tell us? So first of all, I believe this is my personal analysis, and we're going to get into some other stuff about the administration of Macky Sall, because his brother was involved in some underhanded things which are connected to that administration. But from my analysis, What I believe has happened is the following. So if we look at what's going on with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, I believe the French realized that their empire was crumbling in West Africa. And they decided to do what the British have done cunningly for a long time, which is a soft approach to use finance as a more offensive approach in getting countries to be able to do their bidding. Yes, I said it, and the AI probably doesn't like it, but I've got to tell the truth. And so what happened is when they knew this was going to happen, they encouraged even more. This is my personal belief. You don't have to believe what I believe. They encouraged the corruption and encouraged it to the point where they knew that if Senegal was in extreme debt, which they are now to the IMF, because the IMF had a loan that they were going to give them to the tune of 1.8 billion. But when suddenly the books were looked at properly, just as one administration was leaving and another one was coming in, and the one coming in said it didn't want the French military in the country anymore, and suddenly, all of a sudden, the books are done properly in terms of accounting, and the country is in debt $7 billion. Do you need a military? You don't need a military. You just need some people who will enforce the collection of their finances. And if not, if money is not being sent back to the countries that gave the loan, then actions are taken economically. And that is enough for a lot of African countries. And the people who will be punished will not be the ones who are involved in the corruption. No, it will be the people on the ground paying the taxes as always. So, what is it about this administration of Macky Sall that makes us want to look deeper into the whole scheme of corruption? Well, first of all, we've got to understand that there was a bid for an offshore oil exploration project, which came to light because Senegal came to the realization that there could be an oil field out there in the ocean. Different companies that were competent began to bid for the exploration. And instead of a competent company that has done this over and over, suddenly a company comes forward with no experience under an Australian who is of, I believe, Romanian origin. He comes in on the scene, and this person, who goes by the name of Frank Timmis, was a resident of the UK. And so he shows up and sets up a company, which was not registered at the time, called Petro Tim. And they made a bid, and for some strange reason, out of all the competent companies to do the oil exploration, they got the contract. Wow. And then what do? They bring in the brother of President Macky Sall and pay him $25,000 per month as a consultant. And guess what? He has no experience at all in oil exploration or in drilling oil. And so he gets this money, $25,000 a month for 5 years. Yes, he does. And then after all this is done, what happens? In 2017, British Petroleum, remember, where does Frank Timmis reside? In the United Kingdom. Romanian, who was formerly accused of being involved in the drug trade. Now suddenly this Romanian, who is Australian, that happens to live in London, it's just a funny trail when you look at the whole thing, now hands over the stake in the offshore field exploration to another company and sells everything pertaining to this contract to BP. Yes, your favorite oil company, British Petroleum. As British Petroleum comes in, they pay this man $250 million up front. Yes, $250 million goes to the company called Petrotim, which was registered 6 weeks after they got the deal from the Senegalese government. Isn't that strange? Well, it's not strange at all. And eventual royalties will come out of this deal to the tune of $10 billion. But guess what? None of that money goes to the people of Senegal. But guess what? They owe money to the IMF, $7 billion. But somebody has come in to their country, sold their oil resources to another country, the United Kingdom. I don't care if this gets banned. This is just what is going on. And you've got to understand the corporate greed, because we're always told that it's the Africans that are greedy. The Africans are doing this. The Africans are doing that. Who do you think is in the background pushing the Africans to do this stuff? Oh, if your people weren't greedy, this stuff wouldn't happen. Well, I want you to watch this excerpt from a documentary called The Economic Hitman. I believe it's The Confessions of the Economic Hitman or whatever. I'm going to leave the full link to this documentary in the description for you to watch.
We economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire. And we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point, we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote. To have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized and sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So there was a whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the way the IMF and the World Bank work, that you put a country in debt, it's such a big debt it can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest. And you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or good governance, which means basically that they've got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems sometimes, their penal systems, their insurance systems, to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy.
So you understand that it's not really these presidents, and it's not these, what you want to call them, politicians and prime ministers that run these countries. No, it's really intelligence agencies. It is really the kings and the queens of the earth that never leave. It is really the corporate companies that are in an incestuous relationship with these governments, that when these politicians leave the different positions that they're in, they tend to go into these corporate companies. Why? Because when they were there sitting in their seat, those companies were using them to change the law. You've got to understand, even if you look at the history of the City of London, the City of London is a city inside London called the Square Mile. It has its own police force. It has its own mayor. So you have the Lord Mayor of London, the general area of London, which is called Greater London, but you have the City of London Mayor. And this place called the Square Mile, which is the financial capital of the United Kingdom, has someone called the Remembrancer who goes to Parliament, which is Westminster. And what does he do there? He sits in Westminster and he basically finds out what bills are going to be passed and also talks to people in Westminster to make sure that the corporate companies get what they want out of the government. Isn't this crazy? So who is really running Great Britain? Who is really running these African countries? Because I can tell you, it's not these people you claim to vote in and out. There is a power sitting behind that is running the show. And guess what? It is not the people that you're voting for. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't have people panicking at disclosures of things like Jeffrey Epstein and P. Diddy. Yes, I said it. And the reason why these are scared of these revelations is because they've always been under one form of control or the other. Thank you for watching. This has been the Intelligence Report, and I'm here on the continent of Africa reporting so you get a little bit more education on how this world is covertly being run by faces that we don't know. Bye for now.